The smell of burning fabric hit Clara Bennett's nostrils half a second before she felt the searing heat licking up her right side, and in that frozen moment of terror, she realized her cotton dress had caught the open flames of the outdoor cooking fire she had been tending for the 30 ranch hands expecting their supper within the hour. She had been reaching across the massive cast iron pot to grab the salt shaker when the wind shifted, sending flames sideways just as the hem of her dress brushed too close to the fire ring. The fabric ignited instantly in the dry Montana air of August 1882, and Clara stumbled backward with a scream that tore from her throat before she could stop it. Her hands flew to her skirt instinctively, trying to beat out the flames that were climbing higher with each passing second, feeding on the layers of cotton and petticoat beneath. The fire spread faster than thought, and panic seized her chest so tightly she could barely draw breath to scream again. Then suddenly a heavy weight slammed into her from the side, knocking her clean off her feet. She hit the hard-packed earth with a grunt, the impact driving the air from her lungs, and immediately something thick and rough smothered the flames against her body. Strong hands pressed the material down firmly, methodically, cutting off the oxygen the fire needed. The heat died quickly, replaced by the scratchy wool of what she now realized was a coat being used to smother every last ember. "Hold still," a deep voice commanded, steady despite the urgency of the situation. "Just hold still, miss. I have got you." Clara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack them. The hands continued their work, checking every inch of fabric, making absolutely certain no spark remained. When they finally pulled away, she found herself staring up at the most striking pair of gray eyes she had ever seen, set in a face that was all hard plains and sun-bronzed skin beneath a layer of trail dust. Dark hair fell across his forehead, where his hat had been knocked aside in his rush to reach her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentler now, but still carrying that note of command. "Did the fire get through to your skin?" Clara tried to speak, but found her throat closed with shock and residual fear. She managed a small shake of her head, though truthfully, she could not be certain. The adrenaline flooding her system made it impossible to feel much of anything except the wild pounding of her pulse. "Let me see," he said, and his hands moved to examine the damaged fabric of her dress. The right side from hip to hem was charred and destroyed, the material falling away in blackened pieces. But beneath it, her petticoat had taken most of the damage. A patch of angry red skin showed through on her outer thigh, but it was not the severe burn it could have been. "You need to get to the house and treat that burn properly. Can you stand?" He was already helping her up before she could answer, one strong arm supporting her weight as though she weighed nothing at all. Clara found her legs shaky but functional, and she pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rapid flutter of her heartbeat beginning to slow. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice coming out hoarse and thin. "You saved my life. If you had not moved so quickly—" "Best not to think on what might have happened," he interrupted, his gray eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch for an entirely different reason. "What matters is, you are safe now." For a long moment they stood there, his arm still around her waist, her hands still pressed to her chest, both of them breathing hard from the shock and excitement. Clara became acutely aware of how close he was, how solid and warm his presence felt, how his coat now lay discarded on the ground, where he had used it to save her without a moment's hesitation for the cost to himself. "Clara! Good Lord, what happened?" The spell broke as Martha Reeves, the ranch owner's wife, came rushing from the main house, her skirts hiked up in a most unladylike fashion as she ran. Behind her came several of the ranch hands who had heard Clara's scream, all wearing expressions of alarm and concern. The cowboy released Clara's waist slowly, as though making sure she could stand on her own, and stepped back a respectful distance. Martha reached them and immediately began fussing over Clara, examining the burn and clucking her tongue. "Inside, right now," Martha commanded in the tone that brooked no argument. "We need to get you out of these clothes and treat that burn before it gets worse. You men get back to work. There is nothing more to see here." But Clara found herself turning back to look at the cowboy who had saved her, wanting to say something more, to thank him properly, to at least learn his name. He had bent to retrieve his coat, examining the scorched wool with an unreadable expression. As though sensing her gaze, he looked up, and their eyes met again across the dusty yard. "Thank you," she said again, putting every ounce of sincerity she possessed into those two simple words. He nodded once, a slight quirk at the corner of his mouth that might have been the beginning of a smile. Just doing what anyone would have done, miss. But they both knew that was not true. He had moved with a speed and decisiveness that spoke of a man used to making split-second decisions, and he had not hesitated for even a heartbeat before throwing himself and his coat into danger to save her. "Come on, child," Martha urged, tugging at Clara's arm. "Before that burn sets in worse." Clara allowed herself to be led away, but she looked back twice more before they reached the house, and both times she found him still watching her, his coat draped over one arm, his hat now back in place, shadowing those remarkable gray eyes. Inside the ranch house, Martha made quick work of helping Clara out of her ruined dress and petticoat, revealing the burn on her thigh that was about the size of a man's hand, red and angry, but not blistered. It could have been so much worse. It should have been so much worse. "You were lucky," Martha said, echoing Clara's thoughts as she fetched her medicine basket. "If that cowboy had not been so quick, you would have gone up like a torch in this dry heat. Who was he? I did not get a good look at his face." "I do not know," Clara admitted, wincing as Martha applied a cool compress soaked in witch hazel to the burn. "I never got his name." "New hire, then," Martha mused. "Jack took on half a dozen new hands last week for the cattle drive next month. Suppose it could be any of them." She glanced at Clara with knowing eyes. "Pretty thing to look at, was he?" Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the burn on her leg. "I was too busy being on fire to notice," she said primly, which made Martha laugh. "Uh-huh. And that is why you are blushing like a schoolgirl right now." Martha patted her knee gently, avoiding the burned area. "You stay put while I fix you something to wear. That dress is done for, but I have got an old one of mine that should fit you well enough until we can make you something new." While Martha rummaged through her wardrobe in the next room, Clara sat on the edge of the bed and let herself shake. The reality of what had almost happened was sinking in now, making her hands tremble and her breath come short. Fire was one of the most dangerous threats on a ranch, where everything was dry timber and grass and cotton fabric, just waiting for a spark. Women had died from their dresses catching fire, sometimes in front of their families, unable to be saved. She had come within seconds of that fate, and he had saved her without thought for himself, moving faster than seemed possible, using his own coat to smother the flames, despite the fact that it was likely one of his few possessions. Cowboys did not make much money, and their gear was precious to them. Yet, he had not hesitated. "Here we are," Martha said, returning with a simple calico dress in blue and white. "This should do until we can get you sorted properly. How is the burn feeling?" "It stings," Clara admitted, "but it is not unbearable. That is the witch hazel working. I will make you a poultice tonight with some comfrey and lavender, keep the swelling down, and help it heal clean." Martha helped Clara into the borrowed dress, which fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in the waist. "You gave us all quite a scare, dear. Jack is going to want to talk about moving the cooking setup further from the house, I expect." Jack Reeves owned the Broken R Ranch, one of the larger spreads in this part of Montana Territory. He and Martha had hired Clara 6 months ago when their previous cook had retired, and they had been nothing but kind to her. Coming west from Ohio had been a risk, answering an advertisement for a ranch cook when she had never been further from home than Columbus. But after her mother died and left her with nothing but debts, Clara had needed a fresh start. The Broken R had provided that. "I should get back to supper," Clara said, starting to stand, but Martha pushed her firmly back down. "You will do no such thing. You have had a terrible shock, and that burn needs rest, not you standing over a hot fire for another 2 hours. I will get some of the hands to finish the meal. They can manage beans and cornbread without burning the place down. But no arguments, doctor's orders, and I am as close to a doctor as you are going to get out here." Martha's expression softened. "You did good work today, Clara. Got the stew made, the bread baked, everything ready to go. The boys just need to keep it warm and dish it out. They can handle that much." Clara wanted to protest further, but found she did not have the energy. The shock was catching up with her, making her feel hollowed out and exhausted. She nodded and lay back against the pillows Martha arranged for her. "Rest now. I will check on you in a bit." After Martha left, Clara stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about gray eyes and strong hands and the feel of being caught and held by someone who had appeared out of nowhere like a guardian angel in chaps and spurs. She failed entirely. Evening was settling over the ranch by the time Clara felt restless enough to get up and move around. The burn on her thigh hurt, but was bearable, and Martha's compress had helped considerably. She made her way to the window and looked out over the yard, where the ranch hands were gathered around the outdoor tables, eating the supper she had prepared. Lanterns had been lit against the gathering darkness, casting warm pools of light across the scene. She scanned the faces, looking for him, and found him sitting slightly apart from the others, his hat tipped back as he ate methodically from his plate. Even from this distance, there was something about the way he held himself that suggested a man comfortable in his own skin, confident without arrogance. As though sensing her attention, he looked up toward the house, and though she knew he probably could not see her in the darkened window, she stepped back instinctively. "Caught you watching him," Martha's voice came from the doorway, amusement clear in her tone. Clara jumped and turned to find the older woman carrying a tray with 2 plates of food and a knowing smile on her face. "I was just checking on the men," Clara protested weakly. Checking on one man in particular, looked like to me." Martha set the tray down on the small table near the window. "I asked around about your hero. His name is James Hartley, goes by Hart. Been working ranches since he was 15, which makes him about 26 now, if I'm figuring right. Jack says he is one of the best hands he has ever hired, good with cattle and horses both, does not drink to excess or start fights. Quiet sort, keeps to himself mostly. 26 to Clara's 22 felt appropriate, not too much of a gap. Not that it mattered, of course. Just because the man had saved her life did not mean anything more would come of it. Men like him probably had girls in every town between here and Texas. "Why are you telling me all this?" Clara asked, accepting the plate Martha handed her. "Because I saw the way you looked at him, and I saw the way he looked at you. Because you are young and pretty and alone in the world, and he is single and decent from what I can tell. Because maybe something good could come from what happened today." Martha sat down with her own plate and fixed Clara with a serious look. "This is hard country, Clara. Harder on women than men, in most ways. Having a good man at your side makes all the difference, and good men are not so easy to find." "You are getting ahead of yourself," Clara said, even as her heart beat a little faster at the idea. "He saved my life. That does not mean he has any interest in courting me." "Well, there is one way to find out. You could thank him properly, maybe tomorrow when you're feeling better. Return his coat once it is cleaned and mended. Strike up a conversation." Martha's eyes twinkled. "I seem to recall you mentioning you were lonely out here, that you wished you had more opportunities to meet suitable young men." Clara had said that about a month ago during a late-night conversation when she had been feeling particularly homesick. There were not many unmarried women in this part of Montana, and the few she had met were either already spoken for or were the daughters of ranchers and merchants who would not give a hired cook a second glance. Clara had no family, no connections, nothing to bring to a marriage except herself and her skills. It made her prospects limited at best. But James Hartley was a hired hand, same as her. They were equals in that regard, and the way he had looked at her suggested he had not found her unappealing. Maybe Martha was right. Maybe this was an opportunity. "I suppose I could return his coat," Clara said slowly. "It would be the polite thing to do." Martha's smile could have lit the entire ranch. "That is my girl. Now eat your supper before it gets cold." The next morning, Clara woke to find the burn had scabbed over nicely and hurt much less than it had the night before. Martha's poultice had worked wonders, and though the skin was still tender, Clara could walk without limping too badly. She dressed carefully in the borrowed calico, braided her honey-brown hair into a practical plait down her back, and tried not to think too hard about what she was planning to do. James Hartley's coat lay on the table where Martha had left it, after beating out the worst of the ash and soot. The wool was good quality, or had been, before Clara's dress had charred parts of it. She examined the damage critically. Several areas would need patching, and the whole thing needed a proper wash, but it was salvageable. She had been sewing since she was old enough to hold a needle, and this was the least she could do for the man who had saved her. She spent the morning working on the coat between her usual kitchen duties, washing it carefully in cool water with lye soap, then sitting on the porch to mend the burned areas with patches cut from an old wool blanket Martha provided. The work was soothing, methodical, giving her time to think about what she would say when she returned it. Thank you seemed insufficient for saving someone's life. The words existed in English to express that depth of gratitude, but Clara could not find them. How did you tell someone they were the reason you still drew breath, that in the split second it had taken him to react, he had changed the entire course of your existence? You did not. You said thank you and hoped your eyes conveyed the rest. By early afternoon, the coat was as good as she could make it. The patches were neat and even, nearly invisible against the dark wool, and the whole thing smelled of soap and sunshine from drying on the porch rail. Clara folded it carefully and went looking for Martha. "I am going to return his coat," she announced, trying to sound casual and failing. Martha looked up from the bread dough she was kneading and grinned. "Good. Last I saw, the hands were working in the south paddock, mending fence. That is about a 15-minute walk from here. Do not rush back on my account." Clara felt her cheeks warm, but refused to rise to the bait. She simply took the coat and headed out, her heart beating faster with each step. The Montana landscape spread out around her in rolling hills of golden grass, broken by stands of cottonwood and willow along the creek beds. The sky stretched overhead in that endless blue that still took her breath away, so different from the Ohio farmland she had grown up on. Here everything felt bigger, wider, more open. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. She found the crew exactly where Martha had said they would be, strung out along a fence line, replacing posts and restringing wire. She spotted James immediately, working alongside 3 other men, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and bronzed by the sun. He had his hat pulled low against the glare, and he was hammering a post into the ground with steady, powerful strikes that spoke of endless reserves of strength. Clara approached slowly, suddenly unsure of herself. What if he did not want to be interrupted at work? What if she was making too much of what had happened? What if... He looked up and saw her. Their eyes met across 30 feet of prairie grass, and he straightened slowly, letting the hammer drop to his side. One of the other men said something to him, but James did not seem to hear it. He just stood there, watching her approach with an expression she could not quite read. "Hello," she called when she was close enough to be heard without shouting. "I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all, miss," he replied, pulling off his hat in a gesture of respect that made her heart flutter stupidly. His dark hair was damp with sweat, curling slightly at his temples. "How are you feeling? That burn healing all right?" "Much better, thank you. Mrs. Reeves is very skilled with medicine." Clara held out the coat, which suddenly seemed inadequate in her hands. "I brought this back. I cleaned and mended it as best I could, though I'm afraid it is not quite as good as it was before." He took the coat slowly, his fingers brushing hers in the transfer, and examined her work with a thoroughness that made her nervous. Would he be upset about the patches? They were visible if you looked closely, marks of damage that had not been there before he had used it to save her. "This is fine work," he said finally, looking up at her with something like wonder in those gray eyes. "Better than I could have done, that is certain. You did not have to go to this trouble." "It was no trouble at all, considering you used it to keep me from burning alive," Clara said, aiming for lightness and achieving something closer to earnest intensity. "I cannot thank you enough for what you did yesterday, Mr. Hartley. You saved my life." He blinked at her use of his name, and a slow smile spread across his face that transformed him from merely handsome to absolutely devastating. "Word travels fast around here, and it is just Hart, please. Mr. Hartley makes me sound like my father." "Hart," she repeated, liking the way it felt in her mouth. "I am Clara Bennett." "I know," he said, and when she raised her eyebrows in question, he added, "Asked around about you. Wanted to make sure you were all right, and I figured it would be strange to keep calling you Miss in my head when you have got a name." The admission that he had been thinking about her at all sent a warm flutter through her chest. "That is fair, I suppose, though I did the same, so we are even." They stood there smiling at each other like fools, while the other ranch hands pretended not to watch and failed completely. Clara knew she should probably leave, let him get back to work, but she found herself reluctant to break this moment, fragile and new as it was. "I should let you get back to it," she made herself say. "I just wanted to return your coat and thank you properly." "I appreciate that." He hesitated, then added in a rush, "Would you mind if I called on you sometime? Properly, I mean, if that is something you might be interested in." Clara's heart leaped so hard she was surprised it did not escape her chest entirely. "I would like that very much." His smile grew even wider. "Sunday, then. I have got the afternoon off, and I thought maybe we could take a walk down by the creek if the weather holds. Sunday would be perfect." They stood there grinning at each other for another moment before one of the other hands called out, "Hart, this post is not going to set itself." "Coming," Hart called back, then lowered his voice for Clara alone. "Sunday. I will come by the house around 2 o'clock. I will be ready." Clara walked back to the ranch house, feeling like she was floating 6 inches off the ground. When she arrived, Martha took one look at her face and laughed. "That well, did it?" "He asked to call on me," Clara said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "Sunday afternoon. Well, praise be, I knew that boy had good sense." Martha pulled her into a quick hug. "You deserve some happiness, Clara. I hope he is everything you are hoping for." Clara hoped so too, but more than that, she hoped she was what he was hoping for as well. Sunday dawned clear and warm, with a gentle breeze that kept the heat from being oppressive. Clara changed clothes 3 times before settling on her best dress, a soft green cotton with tiny white flowers that Martha had helped her make from fabric ordered from the general store in town. She braided her hair and then took it down, tried it up and then down again, before finally settling on leaving it loose around her shoulders with just the sides pinned back. She looked at herself in the small mirror Martha had lent her and hardly recognized the nervous, excited girl staring back. When had she become this person who fretted over her appearance for a man? She had always prided herself on being practical, sensible, not given to flights of fancy or romantic notions. But something about Hart made her want to be pretty, to catch his eye and hold his attention. Something about the way he had looked at her made her feel like maybe she was worth fussing over. At precisely 2 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Clara's stomach flipped over itself as Martha called out, "Clara, your gentleman caller is here." She took a deep breath, smoothed her hands over her skirt one final time, and went to meet him. Hart stood in the doorway in clean clothes, his dark hair still damp from washing, his hat held respectfully in his hands. His gray eyes widened slightly when he saw her, traveling from her face down the length of her dress and back up again in open appreciation. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made Clara's cheeks flush with pleasure. "Thank you. You look very nice yourself." He did. Without the layer of trail dust, he was even more handsome than she remembered, all lean strength and quiet confidence wrapped in clean denim and cotton. "You two have fun," Martha called from the kitchen, not even bothering to hide her smile. "Be back before dark, Clara." "Yes, ma'am," Clara promised, then let Hart offer her his arm. They walked in comfortable silence for the first few minutes, heading toward the creek that ran through the eastern edge of the Broken R property. The grass was tall enough to brush Clara's skirts, and wildflowers dotted the landscape in bursts of purple and yellow. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. "This is nice," Hart said finally. "Peaceful. I do not get a lot of time to just walk and enjoy the scenery." "What do you do when you are not working?" Clara asked. "The ranch keeps you busy, I imagine." "Busy enough, but when I have time, I like to read. Got a few books in my saddlebag that I have read so many times I could probably recite them." He glanced at her. "What about you? What does a cook do for fun around here?" "Not much, honestly. I sew, write letters to a friend back in Ohio sometimes. Martha and I play cards in the evenings when the work is done." She paused. "It can be lonely, if I'm being honest. There are not many other women around." "I know what you mean. Not many folks to talk to when you are riding herd or mending fence. The other hands are good men, but most of them are not much for conversation beyond the weather and the cattle." He led her down a slight slope toward the sound of running water. "I was glad for an excuse to come talk to you. Truth be told, I have been trying to work up the nerve since I got here 2 weeks ago." Clara looked at him in surprise. "Really? But we never even spoke until the fire." "I know, but I saw you around, cooking for the crew, and I thought you were the prettiest thing I had seen in a long time. Then when your dress caught fire, and I was running toward you, all I could think was that I could not let anything happen to you, that the world would be worse off if you were not in it." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "That probably sounds stupid, considering I did not even know you." "It does not sound stupid at all," Clara said softly. "It sounds like exactly the kind of thing a good man would think." They had reached the creek, which ran shallow and clear over smooth stones. Cottonwoods provided dappled shade, and the air was cooler here, carrying the fresh scent of water and growing things. Hart led her to a flat rock near the bank, and they sat side by side, their shoulders almost touching. "Tell me about yourself," Hart said. where you come from, how you ended up way out here in Montana. So Clara told him about growing up in Ohio, about her mother who had raised her alone after her father died in the war, about learning to cook and sew and make do with very little. She told him about her mother's long illness, about the debts left behind, about seeing the advertisement for a ranch cook and deciding to take a chance on something new and different. That was brave, Hart said when she finished. Coming all this way on your own to a place you had never been. Or foolish, Clara countered. I still am not sure which. Brave, he insisted. Foolish would have been staying where you were unhappy and hoping things would get better. Brave is taking control of your own life. What about you? She asked. Where are you from? How did you become a cowboy? Hart's story was similar in some ways to her own. He had grown up on a small farm in Kansas, the youngest of 4 brothers. When his father died and the farm went to the oldest son, Hart had struck out on his own at 15, hiring on with a cattle outfit heading to Texas. He had been working ranches ever since, following the herds, learning the trade, saving what money he could. Do you ever want to settle down? Clara asked. Stop moving and put down roots somewhere? I do, he admitted. More and more lately. I have been thinking it would be nice to have a place of my own, a few head of cattle, maybe a little house, a reason to stay in one place. He looked at her meaningfully. The right reason, I mean. Clara's breath caught. They were moving fast, faster than was probably wise, but she could not bring herself to care. Sometimes you just knew, did you not? Sometimes you met someone and everything in you recognized that this person could be important, could be everything if you let them. I would like that too, she said quietly. I have been moving my whole life in one way or another. It would be nice to belong somewhere, with someone. Hart reached over and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. I know we just met. I know this is probably too fast, but I have got a good feeling about you, Clara Bennett. Like maybe I was meant to end up at this ranch at this time for a reason. To save me from burning to death? She asked, trying for lightness even as her heart pounded. Maybe. Or maybe the fire was just an excuse for me to get to know you. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. Either way, I'm glad I'm here, glad you were here. Me too. They sat by the creek for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Hart told her about the places he had been, the cattle drives he had worked, the storms he had weathered, and the close calls he had survived. Clara told him about learning to cook for 30 men at a time, about the challenges of keeping food fresh in the Montana heat, about her dreams of maybe one day opening a restaurant in town. You are a good cook, Hart said. Best meals I have had in years, and I have eaten at a lot of bunkhouses. That is high praise coming from a man who has been everywhere, Clara teased. I mean it. You have got talent, Clara. If you wanted to open a restaurant, I think you would do well at it. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon when they finally, reluctantly made their way back to the ranch house. Hart walked her right to the door, and they stood there for a moment, neither wanting to say goodbye. Can I see you again? Hart asked. Maybe next Sunday if you are free. I am free, Clara assured him. I would love to see you again. He smiled, and then, very slowly, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. It was chaste, respectful, but it sent sparks racing through Clara's entire body. Good night, Clara. Good night, Hart. She watched him walk away into the gathering dusk, one hand pressed to her cheek where his lips had been, and knew without a doubt that her life had just changed completely. Over the following weeks, Clara and Hart fell into a pattern. He would call on her every Sunday afternoon, and they would walk together, talk together, slowly learning everything there was to know about each other. Sometimes they went to the creek, sometimes they just walked the perimeter of the ranch. Once Hart borrowed a wagon and took her into town, where they had dinner at the small restaurant and caused quite a stir among the locals who were always hungry for gossip. Clara learned that Hart had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh until her sides hurt. She learned that he was patient and kind, quick to help anyone who needed it, slow to anger or judge. She learned that he was saving money for that dream of his own place, that he kept it in a leather pouch in his saddlebag and counted it sometimes when he thought no one was looking. Hart learned that Clara sang while she cooked, usually old hymns she had learned from her mother. He learned that she had a temper when provoked, though it took a lot to provoke her. He learned that she was generous almost to a fault, always putting aside extra food for any of the hands who looked particularly hungry or tired. He learned that she was lonely more often than she let on, and he made it his mission to change that. The other ranch hands watched their courtship with interest and approval. Martha and Jack Reeves watched with the satisfaction of two people who had called this from the beginning. And Clara and Hart simply watched each other, falling deeper with every conversation, every shared smile, every accidental touch that began to feel less accidental and more inevitable. It was 6 weeks after the fire when Hart asked Clara to marry him. They were sitting by the creek again, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Hart had been quiet all afternoon, more so than usual, and Clara had been trying to give him space to work through whatever was on his mind. But finally, she could not stand it anymore. "What is wrong?" she asked. "You have barely said a word in an hour." Hart turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gray eyes made her breath stop. "I am trying to figure out how to say what I want to say without scaring you off." "You are not going to scare me off," Clara promised. "We are past that, are we not?" "I hope so." He took both of her hands in his, holding them like they were something precious. "Clara, I know we have not known each other long. It has only been about 6 weeks since your dress caught fire and I put it out. But I feel like I have known you my whole life. I feel like I was wandering around lost until I met you, and now suddenly everything makes sense." Clara's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Hart, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I have been thinking about my future a lot lately, about what I want my life to look like, and in every version I can imagine, you are there. You are the one I want to come home to at the end of the day. You are the one I want to build something with. You are the reason I want to settle down and stop wandering." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring, worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's. It is the only thing of value I have to my name besides my horse and my savings. I want you to have it. I want you to marry me if you will." Tears sprang to Clara's eyes, blurring the sunset into a watercolor smear of color. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Hart's face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen on him. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her properly for the first time, and Clara thought that this was what all the poems and songs were about. This feeling of rightness, of coming home, of finding the person who made everything else make sense. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Hart rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Clara Bennett. I have loved you since the moment I saw your dress on fire and realized I would do anything to keep you safe." "I love you too," Clara said, and saying the words out loud felt like opening a door she had been keeping locked for years. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Do not be scared. I have got you, same as I did that day. I will always have you." They stayed by the creek until full dark, making plans and promises, stealing kisses and holding each other close. When they finally returned to the ranch house, Martha took one look at Clara's glowing face and the ring on her finger and let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to town. "I knew it," she crowed, pulling Clara into a hug. "I knew that boy had good sense. When is the wedding?" "We have not gotten that far yet," Clara admitted, laughing. "We just got engaged an hour ago." "Soon," Hart said firmly. "As soon as we can arrange it. I have waited long enough for her already." Jack Reeves emerged from his study to add his congratulations and shake Hart's hand. "You are a good man, Hart. You will take care of her right." "I will, sir. I promise you that." They decided on a wedding date 3 weeks away, which would give Clara time to make a dress and Martha time to help plan a small celebration. Hart used some of his savings to pay the preacher and buy supplies for a wedding dinner. Clara worked on her dress every spare moment, sewing by lamplight long into the night, wanting everything to be perfect. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, as though the heavens themselves were blessing the union. Clara dressed in the new gown she had made, a simple but elegant creation of white muslin with lace at the collar and cuffs. Martha helped her arrange her hair in an intricate braided crown and tucked wildflowers into it. "You look like an angel," Martha said, her eyes misty. "Hart is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Clara corrected. "He could have chosen anyone. And he chose you, because you are smart and beautiful and kind, because you are exactly what he needs." Martha squeezed her hands. "Be happy, Clara. You have earned it." The wedding took place in the ranch house parlor, with all the ranch hands and a few people from town in attendance. The preacher was a circuit rider who happened to be passing through, and he conducted the ceremony with warmth and humor. Clara stood next to Hart, holding his hands, looking into those gray eyes that had captivated her from the first moment and pledged her life to his. "I, Clara, take you, Hart, to be my husband," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling through her. "I promise to stand by your side through whatever comes, to be your partner and your friend, to love you for all the days of my life." "I, Hart, take you, Clara, to be my wife," he responded, his voice rough with feeling. "I promise to protect you and provide for you, to honor you and cherish you, to be the man you deserve for as long as I draw breath." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Hart kissed her with a tenderness that made Clara's knees weak. The assembled guests erupted into cheers and applause, and just like that, Clara Bennett became Clara Hartley. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. There was food and music and dancing. Hart held Clara close as they swayed to a fiddle tune, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Are you happy?" he murmured into her hair. "Happier than I have ever been," she answered honestly. "Are you?" "More than I knew it was possible to be." Jack and Martha had given them a wedding gift that had left both Clara and Hart speechless. The use of a small cabin on the far edge of the ranch property, a place where they could live together and have some privacy. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was theirs. Hart had been planning to build them a place eventually using his savings, but this gave them somewhere to start. That night, as they lay together in their marriage bed for the first time, Hart traced the scar on Clara's thigh where the burn had healed, a faint line of discolored skin that would mark her forever. "Does it still hurt?" he asked softly. "Not anymore. It is just a reminder." "A reminder of what?" "That sometimes the worst moments lead to the best things. If my dress had not caught fire, you might never have noticed me. We might never have spoken. I might have gone my whole life never knowing you existed." She covered his hand with hers. "So, I am grateful for this scar. It brought me you." Hart pulled her close and kissed her deeply. "I would have noticed you eventually. You are impossible not to notice," says the man who barely said 2 words to me for 2 weeks. "I was working up the courage," he defended, making her laugh. "You are intimidating, you know, all capable and confident, running that kitchen like a general runs an army. And now you are stuck with this intimidating woman for the rest of your life. Best decision I ever made." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and Clara thought that if she died tomorrow, she would die happy, knowing she had found this, had found him, had found a love that made everything else worth it. But she did not die tomorrow, or the next day, or the next. Instead, she woke up each morning next to the man she loved and went to work cooking for the ranch hands, then came home to the little cabin that was becoming more theirs with each passing day. Hart worked from sunrise to sunset, then came home to her, and they would spend the evenings talking and laughing and learning the rhythms of married life. 3 months after the wedding, Clara realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a couple of weeks, but she waited until she was certain before telling Hart. When she finally did, over dinner in their little cabin, he stared at her for a long moment as though he had not understood the words. "A baby?" he finally said. "We are going to have a baby?" "Next summer, if my calculations are right," Clara confirmed, watching his face anxiously for his reaction. The biggest grin she had ever seen spread across his features. He jumped up from his chair, pulled her into his arms, and spun her around the tiny cabin until she was laughing and begging him to put her down. "We are having a baby!" he shouted, not caring who might hear. "Clara, we are having a baby!" "I know," she laughed. "I am the one carrying it." He set her down gently, then immediately dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "I am your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Clara ran her fingers through his dark hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "You are going to be a wonderful father." "I am going to try my best," he promised, looking up at her with eyes bright with unshed tears. "I am going to give this child everything I never had. A stable home, 2 parents who love each other, a chance to grow up knowing they are wanted and cherished." "We will give them all of that," Clara agreed, "together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Clara had some morning sickness in the early months that made cooking breakfast a challenge. Martha was thrilled at the news and immediately began knitting tiny clothes and blankets. The ranch hands treated Clara like she was made of glass, which she found both annoying and touching. Hart was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was feeling all right, if she was doing too much. "I am pregnant, not dying," Clara finally told him in exasperation after he insisted on carrying a basket of laundry that weighed maybe 5 pounds. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I am not going to break. I know, I just worry. You are carrying the most important thing in the world to me." It was hard to be annoyed when he put it like that. As Clara's belly swelled with their growing child, Hart became even more determined to secure their future. He approached Jack Reeves about buying a piece of land from him, a section at the edge of the property that included good grazing land and a creek. Jack, who had developed a real fondness for the young couple, offered to sell it to them at a price Hart could afford if he was willing to pay it off over time. Hart agreed immediately, and suddenly they had more than just a cabin. They had land, a future, a place to build something lasting. "We are going to have our own ranch," Hart told Clara that night, his eyes shining with dreams. "It will not be much at first, just a few cattle. But we can build it up. Our children can inherit it someday. We can make something that lasts." "Our children," Clara repeated, liking the sound of it. "You are already planning for more than one?" "If you are willing," he said, his hand resting gently on her swollen belly. "I want a houseful. I want our home to be full of noise and laughter and life." "Then we will fill it," Clara promised. Their son was born on a blistering hot day in July 1883, after a labor that lasted 18 hours and left Clara exhausted but elated. Hart had paced outside the cabin the entire time, until Martha finally took pity on him and let him come inside to hold Clara's hand through the final pushes. "One more," Martha coached. "One more big push, Clara, and you will get to meet your baby." Clara bore down with everything she had left, and suddenly there was a sound that she would never forget as long as she lived. The sharp, indignant wail of a newborn taking his first breath. "It is a boy," Martha announced, laying the squirming, crying bundle on Clara's chest. A big, healthy boy. Clara looked down at her son through tears of joy and exhaustion, taking in his red face, his shock of dark hair, his tiny fists waving in the air. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Hart leaned over them both, his own face wet with tears, and touched his son's cheek with one gentle finger. "He is perfect, Clara. He is absolutely perfect." They named him James, after Hart, with the middle name Thomas after Clara's father. Little Jamie, as they took to calling him, had his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn streak. He nursed hungrily and slept fitfully, keeping them both up most nights for the first few months. But neither Clara nor Hart minded. They would sit together in the rocking chair Hart had made, taking turns holding their son, marveling at the fact that they had created this perfect tiny human. Life settled into a new rhythm. Clara still cooked for the ranch hands when she could, though Martha had hired another girl to help with the load. Most of Clara's time was taken up with caring for Jamie and helping Hart with their fledgling ranch. They had started with just 10 head of cattle, bought with Hart's savings and a loan from Jack Reeves, but Hart had plans to build the herd slowly and carefully. "No rushing," he told Clara. "We will do this right, take our time, make smart decisions. I want to build something that will still be here when Jamie has children of his own." Clara loved watching Hart with their son. He was patient and gentle, completely unafraid of the crying or the mess or the responsibility. He would take Jamie with him sometimes when he rode out to check on the cattle, the baby strapped to his chest in a sling Clara had sewn. He sang to Jamie, told him stories, pointed out hawks and deer and the shapes of clouds. "You are going to spoil him," Clara teased one evening, watching Hart bounce a fussy Jamie while she prepared dinner. "Impossible to spoil a baby with love and attention," Hart countered. "Besides, he is only going to be this small once. I want to enjoy every minute of it." When Jamie was 6 months old, Clara realized she was pregnant again. This time the news was less of a shock and more of a joy, though Hart did resume his overbearing protectiveness with renewed vigor. "Twice in as many years," Martha said, shaking her head but smiling. "You two do not waste time, do you?" "Hart wants a houseful," Clara said, one hand on her belly where a second child was just beginning to make their presence known. I am apparently taking him literally. Their daughter, Elizabeth Rose, was born in the spring of 1884, and she was everything Jamie was not. Where he had been loud and demanding, she was quiet and content. Where he had been restless, she was peaceful. She had Clara's honey brown hair and Hart's steady temperament, and from the moment Jamie met his baby sister, he was smitten. "Baby," he said, which at 10 months old was one of his few words. He patted Elizabeth's head gently, then looked up at his parents with pride. "My baby." "That is right," Hart said, scooping Jamie up so he could see better. "Your baby sister. You are going to help us take care of her, right?" Jamie nodded solemnly, taking his new responsibility very seriously. The years that followed were hard, but happy. Hart and Clara worked sunup to sundown, building their ranch head by head, year by year. They added a room onto the cabin, then another. Hart built a proper barn and a chicken coop. Clara planted a garden and learned to preserve vegetables for the winter. Their herd grew to 50 head, then 100. They hired their first ranch hand, a young man named Tom, who reminded Hart of himself at that age. Jamie grew into a sturdy, serious boy who loved the ranch and the cattle and following his father everywhere. Elizabeth was quieter, more thoughtful, but she had a spine of steel beneath her gentle exterior. She adored her brother and would follow him anywhere, which sometimes got them both into trouble. When Jamie was 4 and Elizabeth was 2, Clara had twin boys, Samuel and Joseph, who were absolute hellions from the moment they could crawl. Hart joked that they must be making up for how easy Elizabeth had been, and Clara could not argue. The twins were into everything, climbing everything, breaking everything, and making the cabin ring with their noise and laughter. "This is what I wanted," Hart said one evening as they watched their 4 children play in the yard, the twins chasing Jamie while Elizabeth picked flowers nearby. "This exactly, a family, a home, something worth working for." "We have built a good life," Clara agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "Sometimes I think about that day, when my dress caught fire, how different everything might have been if you had not been there. I was there, though. I will always be there." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You and me, Clara, we are forever." They had 2 more children over the following years, another daughter named Grace, and finally another son they called Daniel. 6 children in total, which seemed to satisfy Hart's desire for a houseful and push Clara to her absolute limit. "No more," she told him firmly after Daniel was born. "I love our children, but I am done growing them. 6 is enough." "6 is perfect," Hart agreed readily. "I have got everything I could ever want right here." The ranch prospered. By the time Jamie was 15, they had 300 head of cattle and 5 hired hands. They had built a proper ranch house, with real glass windows and plank floors, and enough bedrooms for everyone to have their own space. They had standing in the community, respect from their neighbors, and the satisfaction of knowing they had built it all themselves from nothing. Clara still cooked, though now it was only for the family and the handful of ranch hands they employed. She taught Elizabeth and Grace everything she knew, passing down recipes and techniques she had learned from her mother and developed herself. The girls were both excellent cooks, though Elizabeth had a particular gift for baking that made her the favorite of everyone on the ranch. Hart taught the boys to ride and rope and manage cattle. Jamie took to it like he had been born for it, a natural rancher with good instincts and a calm hand. The twins were more wild, but they were learning, and Hart was patient with them. Daniel was still too young for much beyond feeding chickens, but he followed his brothers everywhere with the same devotion Elizabeth had once shown Jamie. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hart took Clara back to the spot by the creek where he had proposed, where they had spent so many Sunday afternoons falling in love. The children were with Martha for the evening, giving them a rare moment of privacy. 10 years, Hart marveled, pulling Clara close. Has it really been 10 years? 10 years, 6 children, 1 ranch, and countless memories, Clara confirmed. Though some days it feels like yesterday we were just starting out. And some days it feels like we have always been together. He kissed her softly. "I love you more now than I did on our wedding day. I did not think that was possible, but it is true. Every year with you makes me love you more. I love you too. You have given me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a family, a purpose. I was so lost before I met you, and now I cannot imagine my life any other way." They stood by the creek as the sun set, the same way they had done so many times before. And Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. A dress catching fire, a cowboy throwing his coat, a moment of danger that had turned into a lifetime of love. "Do you ever regret it?" Hart asked quietly. "Any of it? The hard work, the struggles, the constant chaos of raising 6 children on a ranch?" "Not for a single second," Clara said without hesitation. "This life, this family, you are everything to me. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "Good, because I would not change a single thing." He tightened his arms around her. "Well, maybe I would have asked you to marry me sooner. We wasted those 2 weeks when I was too nervous to talk to you." Clara laughed. 2 weeks is not so long in the grand scheme of things. We found each other when we were meant to. Everything happened exactly as it should. They stayed by the creek until the stars came out, talking and holding each other, making promises for the next 10 years and the 10 after that. When they finally headed back to the ranch house, they walked hand in hand, and Clara felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt the first time Hart had touched her all those years ago. The children grew. Jamie reached adulthood and showed no interest in leaving the ranch, much to Hart's quiet pride. He was good with the cattle, good with the land, and he had started courting a girl from town that Clara approved of wholeheartedly. Elizabeth was 16 and beautiful, turning heads whenever they went into town, but she was sensible and had no interest in rushing into anything. The twins were 14 and still hellions, though they were finally starting to settle into their responsibilities. Grace was 12 and bookish, always with her nose in some story or another. Daniel, at 8, was the baby of the family and absolutely spoiled by everyone. Hart's hair had started to go gray at the temples, and Clara had laugh lines around her eyes and mouth from years of smiling. Their hands were calloused from work, their bodies bearing the marks of a life lived fully and hard. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love by a creek in the Montana summer. "We did good," Hart said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over land that belonged to them, over a ranch they had built from nothing. "Look at all of this, Clara. We did this together." "We did," she agreed, lacing her fingers through his. "And we are not done yet. We have got grandchildren to spoil someday, and the ranch to leave to the kids, and years left to spend together." "Years and years," Hart echoed, smiling. "I like the sound of that." Jamie married his sweetheart when he was 20, a bright, capable girl named Sarah who fit into the family like she had always been there. A year later, they had a son, and Hart and Clara became grandparents for the first time. Little James Hart. Hartley was the spitting image of his grandfather, and Clara joked that they were doomed to have gray-eyed, dark-haired boys for generations to come. Elizabeth married at 19 to a rancher from the next county over, a good man who respected her intelligence and treated her like a queen. She had twins, a boy and a girl, within the first year, and Clara laughed at the karmic justice of it. "Now, you know what I went through with Sam and Joseph," she told her daughter, who was juggling 2 crying babies with the patience of a saint. The ranch continued to prosper. They weathered bad years and good years, harsh winters and dry summers, market fluctuations and disease. But they weathered it together, Hart and Clara, the way they had weathered everything since the day her dress caught fire and he saved her life. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Hart threw a big party. Everyone they knew came, friends, neighbors, ranch hands past and present, all 6 of their children and their growing number of grandchildren. Martha and Jack Reeves were there, both much older but still sharp and engaged. The ranch house rang with music and laughter, with the sounds of a life well lived and a family well loved. Hart stood up to make a speech, pulling Clara to stand beside him. 25 years ago, I watched this woman's dress catch on fire while she was cooking for the ranch hands where I worked. I threw my coat over her and put out the flames, and I thought that would be the end of it. A good deed done, nothing more." The assembled guests chuckled, knowing full well there had been much more to the story. But something happened in that moment. When I saw her in danger, when I realized I could lose her before I even knew her, something in me knew. This was important. She was important. And I have been trying to live up to that moment every day since. He turned to Clara, his gray eyes as intense as they had been when he was 26. "You have made my life more than I ever dreamed it could be. You have given me children and grandchildren, a home and a purpose, and a love that I cannot put into words. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for being exactly who you are." Clara was crying openly now, not caring who saw. "Thank you for saving me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just from the fire, but from loneliness and fear and never knowing what it feels like to be completely, utterly loved. You are my everything, Hart Hartley. You always have been, and you always will be." They kissed while their family and friends cheered, and Clara thought that this was what happily ever after looked like. Not perfection, but partnership. Not ease, but effort that was worth it. Not a fairy tale, but something better. A real life, built with real love, lasting longer than either of them had ever imagined possible. The years continued to pass. Hart's hair went completely gray, and Clara's did too, though she claimed hers was from raising 6 children and countless grandchildren more than from age. They slowed down a bit, letting Jamie take over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch while they spent time with the grandchildren and each other. Hart built Clara a swing on the porch of the ranch house, and they would sit there in the evenings, rocking gently, holding hands, watching the world they had created carry on around them. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in companionable silence. But they were always together, the way they had been for decades, the way they planned to be for however many years they had left. "Do you remember," Clara said one evening, "that first Sunday you came to call on me? How nervous we both were. I remember thinking you were the prettiest thing I had ever seen in that green dress with the white flowers," Hart replied. "I remember being terrified I would say something stupid and ruin my chances." "You did not say anything stupid. You were perfect. You were perfect. You are perfect." He squeezed her hand. "I would do it all again, you know. Every moment, every struggle, every joy. I would choose you every single time. And I would choose you," Clara promised, "forever and always." They sat on the porch swing as the sun set over the Montana landscape, over the ranch that bore their name and their legacy, surrounded by the sounds of their children and grandchildren living and loving and carrying on. And Clara thought about how strange and wonderful life could be, how a single moment could change everything, how the worst thing that had ever happened to her, her dress catching fire, had led directly to the best thing, spending her life with Hart Hartley. The fire had burned away her old life, her loneliness, her uncertainty, and from those ashes had risen something beautiful and lasting. A love story that had spanned decades and would continue to span them, generation after generation, built on the foundation of a cowboy who had thrown his coat without hesitation and a woman who had been brave enough to love him back. As the stars came out one by one, Clara rested her head on Hart's shoulder and felt his arm come around her, solid and sure, and exactly where it had always been. This was home. This was love. This was everything. And it had all started with a fire and a coat, and a moment of perfect, terrifying clarity that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes you have to burn away the old to make room for the new. Sometimes you have to risk everything to gain everything. Clara had risked nothing that day her dress caught fire. She had simply been cooking, doing her job, living her life. But Hart had risked something when he threw his coat over her flames. He had risked his safety, his possessions, his comfort. And in doing so, he had gained a wife, a family, a legacy. They sat on the porch swing until long after dark, holding each other in the Montana night. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that would outlast them both. Their children were inside, putting the grandchildren to bed, carrying on the traditions Clara and Hart had established. The ranch would go on. The love would go on. The story would go on, passed down from parent to child, from grandparent to grandchild, about the day a dress caught fire and a cowboy saved more than just a life. He saved a future. "I love you," Clara whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Hart whispered back. "Always." And under the vast Montana sky, surrounded by everything they had built together, Clara and Hart held each other close and knew that they had found something rare and precious. A love that had stood the test of time, that had weathered every storm, that had grown stronger with each passing year. A love that had started with fire and would burn forever, steady and warm and true, lighting the way for everyone who came after them. The years rolled on like the seasons, each one bringing its own joys and challenges, but Hart and Clara faced them together, the way they had always done, the way they would always do. They celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, weddings and births, watched their children have children who had children of their own. The ranch prospered under Jamie's management, and the other children found their own paths while staying close to home and family. Elizabeth became known throughout the territory for her baking, and she started a small business selling bread and pies. The twins eventually settled down, married sisters from town, and built homes on the ranch property, raising their families side by side. Grace shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to be a teacher, and with Hart and Clara's blessing and financial help, she went to school in the East before returning to open a small schoolhouse on the ranch where all the local children could learn. Daniel, the baby, inherited his father's steady temperament and his mother's kind heart, and he became a veterinarian, tending to the animals throughout the region. Through it all, Hart and Clara remained the center of the family, the foundation on which everything else was built. They were the ones people came to for advice, for comfort, for stories about the old days when the ranch was just a cabin and a dream. They were the proof that love could last, that hard work paid off, that taking a chance on someone could lead to everything you never knew you needed. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the family threw another big party, even larger than the one 25 years before. Great-grandchildren ran around the yard, and Clara lost count of how many there were. 20? 25? More? She could not keep track anymore, though she knew each of their names and exactly who they belonged to. Hart was 70 now, his hair white instead of gray, his movements slower but still strong. Clara was 66, her hands gnarled with arthritis, but still capable of rolling out pie dough and mending clothes. They moved easier together than most young couples, anticipating each other's needs, finishing each other's sentences, existing in the kind of harmony that only came from 4 decades of partnership. 40 years, Hart marveled as they danced slowly to music played by their grandson on a fiddle. That is longer than some people live entire lives. And we have lived 3 or 4 lives in that time, Clara replied, resting her head against his chest. We have been young lovers, new parents, struggling ranchers, established landowners, grandparents, great-grandparents. We have been everything together. And I have loved you through every version, Hart said softly. I will love you through every version still to come. They danced until Clara's legs got tired, then sat on their porch swing and watched the party continue around them. Children played, adults talked and laughed. Food was consumed in massive quantities. It was loud and chaotic and absolutely perfect. This is what that moment was for, Clara said suddenly. When you saved me from the fire, it was not just about saving my life. It was about saving all of this. She gestured at the scene before them. Every person here exists because you threw your coat over my burning dress. Every laugh, every smile, every moment of joy, it all stems from that one act of courage and kindness. Hart was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the weight of that truth. I never thought of it that way, he finally said. I just saw you in danger and reacted, but you were right. Everything we have, everything we are, it all started there. So, thank you, Clara said, turning to look at him fully. Thank you for being the kind of man who runs toward danger instead of away from it. Thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for building this impossible, wonderful life with me. Hart cupped her face in his weathered hands and kissed her with all the tenderness of their first kiss and all the depth of 4 decades of kisses since. Thank you for saying yes, he murmured against her lips. Thank you for choosing me every day since. Thank you for being my everything. They held each other as the party went on around them, 2 old people who still felt young when they were together, who still found joy in each other's presence, who still loved with the same intensity they had at 22 and 26. The fire that had brought them together had never gone out. It had just changed form, from the dangerous flames that had threatened Clara's life to the warm, steady glow that had illuminated their entire existence together. As the sun set on their 40th anniversary, painting the Montana sky in the same shades of orange and pink and gold it had been painting for all the years they had been together, Clara reflected on the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. She had come west as a lonely cook with no prospects and no future. She had nearly died in a fire, and from that near tragedy had come everything she held dear. What are you thinking about? Hart asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Just about how lucky I am, Clara replied. How blessed we are. How grateful I feel for every moment of this life we have built. Me too, Hart agreed. Every single day, I wake up grateful. Grateful for you, for our family, for this land, for everything we have been given and everything we have earned." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their legacy play out before them in the form of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them bearing pieces of Clara and Hart in their faces, their gestures, their laughter. This was immortality, Clara thought. Not living forever yourself, but living on through the people you created and influenced and loved. The party wound down as night fell. Children were carried to wagons and beds. Adults said their goodbyes and thank yous, promising to see each other soon. Eventually, only Hart and Clara remained on the porch, the house quiet behind them, the ranch settling into its nighttime rhythms around them. "Another 40 years?" Hart asked, only half joking. Clara laughed. "I do not think either of us is making it to 100, my love, but whatever time we have left, I want to spend it exactly like this, with you on this porch, watching the stars come out over the life we built together." That sounds perfect to me, and it was perfect, all of it. The struggles and the triumphs, the heartaches and the joys, the ordinary days and the extraordinary moments. It was a life fully lived, a love fully expressed, a legacy fully established. It was everything that mattered, distilled down to its purest essence. Two people who had found each other and held on through everything life threw at them. Hart and Clara lived another 8 years after that 40th anniversary. Years filled with more grandchildren and great-grandchildren, more sunsets on the porch, more quiet moments of contentment. Hart's health began to fail slowly, his heart giving out gradually, but he remained cheerful and grateful until the end. He died on a crisp autumn morning, sitting in his favorite chair with Clara holding his hand, surrounded by their children. His last words were, "I love you," directed at Clara, and his last expression was a smile. He had lived 78 years, 50 of them with Clara by his side, and he died knowing he had made a difference, that his life had mattered, that he was loved beyond measure. Clara grieved him deeply, but she did not fall apart. She had 50 years of memories to sustain her, a family that surrounded her with love, and the knowledge that Hart would not have wanted her to spend her remaining time in sorrow. She lived another 5 years after he died, 5 years filled with her children and grandchildren, with quilting and baking and telling stories about the man she had loved. She talked often about the day her dress caught fire, about the cowboy who had thrown his coat to save her, about how that one moment had determined the course of her entire life. The story became a favorite among the grandchildren, who never tired of hearing about how Grandma Clara had almost died, and how Grandpa Hart had saved her, and they had fallen in love and lived happily ever after. "It is like a fairy tale," one of the great-grandchildren said once. "Better than a fairy tale," Clara corrected gently. "Because it is true, and because unlike fairy tales that end at the wedding, our story kept going. The real magic was not in the dramatic rescue. It was in waking up next to him every morning for 50 years. It was in raising children and building a ranch and growing old together. That is where the real, happily ever after lives, in the ordinary moments that make up a life." Clara died in her sleep on a warm spring night, with the windows open and the smell of lilacs drifting in on the breeze. She was 81 years old, and she died peacefully, with a smile on her face, dreaming of a young cowboy with gray eyes who had once thrown his coat over her flames. They buried her next to Hart on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky as big and blue as the one they had lived under for so many years. The entire family gathered for the funeral, 3 generations of people who existed because of the love Clara and Hart had shared. They told stories and cried and laughed and celebrated a life extraordinarily well lived. And on the headstones they placed, simple and elegant, they carved words that summed up everything that mattered. Clara Bennett Hartley, 1860 to 1942. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and friend. Her dress caught fire, he threw his coat from those flames, a legacy of love. James Hart, Hartley, 1856 to 1934. Beloved husband, father, grandfather, and friend. He saved her life, she saved his heart. Together, they built forever. The ranch continued under Jamie's management, then his sons, then his grandsons, passed down through generations who all knew the story of how it began. The little cabin where Clara and Hart had first lived as newlyweds was preserved, turned into a kind of shrine to the founding of the family. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Clara's dress caught fire, the family gathered to tell the story again, to remember the moment that had started everything, to honor the love that had made them all possible, because that was what real love did. It did not just sustain two people. It created ripples that extended outward infinitely, touching lives that had not even been born yet, shaping futures that could not be predicted. Clara and Hart's love had started with a fire and a coat, but it had become something so much larger than that. It had become a foundation, a legacy, a testament to what was possible when two people chose each other and kept choosing each other, day after day, year after year, through everything life brought their way. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Clara and Hart were together again, young and whole, dancing by a creek in the Montana sunshine, beginning their forever all over again. The fire had brought them together. Love had kept them together, and nothing, not even death, could truly separate them. They were bound by something stronger than time, deeper than memory, more eternal than the stars wheeling overhead in that vast Montana sky. Their story was complete. Their circle was closed, and the happily ever after they had built together, brick by brick, day by day, moment by moment, would last as long as there were people to remember it, to tell it, to be inspired by it. From flames and ashes had come the greatest love story their family would ever know, and it would echo through generations yet to come, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying moments lead to the most beautiful lives. And sometimes all it takes is one person being brave enough to throw their coat over your flames to change everything forever.